Welcome everyone to the Energy UK breakfast briefing on the next steps for household energy affordability and debt. I'm Ed Rees. I'm the head of policy for retail at Energy UK, and I'll be chairing the session today. We're delighted that Baringa have kindly agreed to sponsor the session. And this is actually the second event we've done on the theme, sponsored by Baringa. And we've held them following the price cap level announcements. The last event was in February, following the launch of our report, Everyone Pays. The report highlighted the scale of the systematic energy debt problem at £5.5 billion and its potential trajectory towards 7 billion by the end of this year. And we discussed the coordinated actions that are needed to address it. And that was in February, late February. And at the time, we were considering the welcome relief for bill payers from the levy changes announced in the autumn 2025 budget. We discussed and welcomed the role of the debt relief support scheme that was planned for spring or summer this year. But then just days after that session, the war in Iran and the Middle East started, driving up oil and gas prices. And this impact has been seen yesterday in the heightened price cap level announced for July, over £200 higher on a like-for-like basis. Since February, we've also seen the debt relief support scheme plans delayed, which is another concerning outcome for the affordability and debt picture. With this in context, it's perhaps unsurprising that one of Energy UK's members, EDF, published a blog last week highlighting many of the same concerns and solutions as in the Everyone Pays report. The issues clearly haven't gone away, and we'll share a link to that blog in the chat. It highlights data sharing options needed, prepayment solutions, and their key role, as well as better targeted support, which will be key themes for today's discussion. And the regulator Ofgem is clearly alive to these issues. Tim Jarvis, the chief exec at Ofgem, is quoted in the Financial Times over the weekend on the balance between keeping customers on supply and debt build-up. And clearly the pendulum has swung away from empowering suppliers to minimise debt. However, with energy prices so high over a protracted period, leading to demand destruction for the average household, as seen in the significant change in typical consumption levels, it's really clear that preventing self-rationing and keeping homes warm for certain customers is clearly vital. So targeted support and debt recovery must be tackled together. So that's what the panelists will be covering today. And we're going to go through the panelists with opening remarks and then have about 25 minutes for questions and comments. We'd ask that you prep your questions for the panelists, putting them in the chat whenever you can, and then we can line those up and tackle them with the speakers following their opening remarks. So we're going to start with Jasmine Jenkinson, a manager within the Energy and Resources team at Bringa, covering insight into how the debt crisis is progressing and the necessary steps to address it. Next, we have David Hall, Deputy Director at Ofgem, with a perspective from the regulator, followed by Emily Whitford, Senior Public Policy Advocate at Step Change, providing a consumer view. And then we've got Louise Gilmore, Policy Advocacy Manager at E.ON UK, providing a supplier view. And finally, Fabian Chessel, Central Government Lead at Policy and Practice, talking about data sharing and forms of support intervention. So that's the plan for the session. I'm going to hand over to Jasmine for her opening remarks. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Ed. And thank you to Energy UK for hosting today's event and inviting Baringa to sponsor it. I'll start by introducing myself a bit further, introducing Baringa and who we are, and then setting out the problem statement and some ideas that we believe as an industry we could focus on before handing to my fellow panelists to share their perspectives and insights. So I'm Jasmine Jenkinson, a manager at Baringa Partners with over 8 years' experience in the UK energy retail sector. I specialise in credit and collections transformation, helping suppliers improve their recovery processes whilst navigating the complex regulations and delivering support to those most vulnerable customers. Baringa's a leading management consulting firm. We're in a very privileged position, having worked with all leading suppliers as well as the regulator and policymakers on the biggest challenges facing the energy market. So as Ed set out, yesterday's price cap announcement shows how the events in the Middle East has driven higher wholesale prices that have now flown through into those household bills. So for a typical dual fuel customer paying by direct debit, they will now be paying roughly £221 more come July the 1st. Alongside the price cap yesterday, we did see the publication of the new typical domestic consumption values, which saw a 7% reduction in electricity and a 17% reduction in gas values. So in turn, this roughly reduces the price gap to £1,663, about £20 more than the previous cap period, and will undoubtedly make consumers nervous about their growing energy costs. From that, Baringa's analysis anticipates that the crisis in the Middle East could have two significant impacts over the course of this year. So firstly, we anticipate that a further 370,000 households will fall into deeper financial vulnerability. An additional 0.6 billion of debt could be accrued this winter. In addition to the current debt stock, which stands at 4.55 billion, energy debt this year, we would expect to surpass that 6 billion. And without further intervention, critically, this could rise exponentially through the course of next year. I guess we've historically seen this cycle before through the cost of living and COVID crisis of wholesale prices rising, that driving up consumer energy bills, coupled with rising inflation and interest rate rises. And that has then in turn always driven through higher levels of financial vulnerability and increased debt stock. What's unique, I guess, this time going into this is households are less able to absorb that shock as they were coming through COVID when people had higher cash reserves, and therefore this impact is likely to be larger than previous crises. From a Baringa perspective, we run a twice yearly benchmarking activity across the market, both in domestic and non-domestic for debt benchmarking. And some of our latest insight from our latest round of benchmarking shows that energy debt is now affecting 1 in 4 UK households. Of that energy debt, 73% of debt is now unsecured, so without a repayment plan or any agreement to recover that debt. And for those unsecured debtors, we're now seeing the average debt per debtor sit at £1,674. I think the most worrying thing coming out of this round of benchmarking is that nearly 2/3 of domestic debt is now over 12 months old. And that was also referenced through the EDF blog of those customers that are in debt are falling into further debt, and they're struggling to find a route out. Equally, on that, debt greater than 12 months is historically the hardest to recover. It tends to be those customers that do not have the means to pay. So that is placing a lot of pressure on suppliers' balance sheets. The cost of debt is becoming increasingly material and continues to be socialised across bills. So ultimately, everyone is paying, and we expect that without a significant change, that could continue to grow. This makes energy debt not just a consumer affordability challenge, but a growing risk to the sector's investability and its ability to deliver a fair transition. As the last crisis showed, even when the wholesale prices fall, the economic and social effects endure. Households, suppliers, and policymakers are still dealing with the last consequences of the price shock. And therefore, that's why we think a reset for the industry is required. There's 3 clear strategies we believe that should be part of that reset. Firstly, targeted support for customers that need it the most. So using robust data and clearer guidance to identify those households most in need. We believe that government should lead that framework, working with consumer groups and industry to bring a holistic view of household affordability. Secondly, where customers can afford to pay, they should do so, helping to reduce that socialised cost of debt for everyone. And that'll require Ofgem to provide clearer guidance on fair and proportionate debt management approaches. Lastly, we need to fix industry processes that contribute to avoidable debt build-up, including the reform of the home move process, in which Baringa currently estimates that around 30% of domestic debt is associated with. It was super positive to see last week in Tim Jarvis's speech at Utility Week that called out specifically as a target area. There's a lot to do to solve this problem, but if we want to make real progress, we should focus on what has the greatest impact and the clearest route to delivery ahead of this winter. Thank you. I'm now going to pass to David from Ofgem.
Thank you, and hi everyone. So first of all, thank you for inviting me to this briefing today. I mean, we've already heard that debt and affordability are critical challenges in the sector, and to solve them, we really need a joint effort across all parties. So it's really fantastic to see events like this bringing these parties together. And it's really important for us as a regulator to be part of it. So I'm David, I'm Deputy Director at Ofgem, and today I'm going to talk about some of the actions that were taken in this area with a focus on our debt strategy and the cost allocation and recovery review. So starting with debt, and we've heard much of this already, it will surprise no one here to know that it's one of the most pressing challenges in the sector right now. And we've heard the size of the challenge as well. Clearly, it reflects a real affordability pressure. Many of the people, as Tim said last week, in debt are not there by choice. We've also heard how the recent geopolitical shocks will be affecting prices and ultimately feed through to debt as well. But obviously, debt also has wider impacts, and we know that all bill payers ultimately share the costs of this debt. They add up to about £50 a year for a typical direct debit customer and much more for those on standard credit. So many of the households picking up the costs sort of by simple maths are also households who are facing pressures elsewhere themselves. And so that debt is clearly making those pressures worse too. So as I mentioned, and it's already been sort of name checked, Tim Jarvis, our interim CEO, set out last week, the way that we manage debt as a sector really needs to change. He spoke about how we need to strike the right balance, which means strong protection for those who genuinely need that support, but then clear incentives for those who can pay to do so. And he also spoke about what that means about resetting expectations, and very much chimes with Jasmine's opening remarks earlier. Responsibilities on all sides, really, between suppliers, who obviously must bill accurately, act early, and offer sustainable repayment options and the right support to customers. Consumers, who should, of course, pay when they can. We as Ofgem, who need to ensure that appropriate debt recovery is possible alongside the protections that customers need, and working with consumer groups to get those protections right. And of course, government have to decide what additional support is provided, how it's funded, and ultimately the mechanisms and data that they need to facilitate to make that happen as well. So I'll talk a bit about what we're doing in this area, and we're moving quickly to take action. As you'll hear, and you will have heard, it's very much a priority for us. We're ready to implement a debt release scheme to reset past debt, and we're also addressing the more structural issues too. We've heard about the home moves, where around a third of the debt, we think, builds up from home moves at the moment, where the current system effectively provides open-ended credit to customers who move into new homes. We issued a call for input last year, and we'll be consulting over the summer on changes here. And we're working with suppliers already right now on what can be done within existing rules. Alongside this, we're looking across a suite of measures to look at how we might, for example, support better payment practices, including pay-as-you-go where it's appropriate, enable more flexible modern payment methods similarly, and finally, to make better use of smart data to identify and support customers earlier in the cycle as well. I also just wanted to take a brief minute to talk about the cost allocation and recovery review, because this is about really taking a step back and looking at the opportunities and challenges coming down the track in our changing system, and ultimately how we share the costs for the investment that we need, and the sort of impact on affordability that this might have. It's also my main responsibility in Ofgem, so I didn't want to miss the opportunity to give it a brief mention too, given its relevance here. So with this review, we've got a very clear opportunity, but some important choices too. We're moving towards a system with higher fixed costs and less exposure to fossil fuel prices, at the same time as new technology opens up new options for how we can build more smartly too. So what we're really trying to do is make sure that the way that we allocate costs supports efficiency, net zero growth, and fairness. Now, as I mentioned, ultimately it's for government to set the overall policy for the sector, and some of the tools like affordability support are very much rightly decisions for them. But this review gives us a real opportunity also to step back and explore how cost allocation could affect what different customers pay in the future too. And I just wanted to mention it because I think many of you will be involved with our engagement over the coming weeks and will be critical in shaping our views on that as well. So to sum up, we really need coordinated action across the sector to get on top of debt and affordability. And as I say, events like today are really important part of this. And I'm looking forward to hearing the different perspectives and ideas about how we can all do this more effectively. So thank you for that. And I think I'm handing over next to, is it Emily?
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, David. And yeah, thanks Energy UK for having me today. Yeah, so I'm Emily from Step Change Debt Charity, and for those that don't know us or aren't as familiar with us, we're a leading provider of free debt advice in the UK with services offered online and over the phone. But today I wanted to share some insights from our latest policy report, Plugging the Gap, which is a deep dive into our clients' experiences of both energy and water affordability challenges, including things like drivers of arrears and demographic considerations. And the focus of the report for reference was less on debt collection practices and more on upfront affordability. So that won't be my focus today, but goes without saying that's a massive area for us too, policy-wise. And yeah, I guess to start off with addressing yesterday's price cap news. So though the price increase we'll see in July is lower relative to some of those seen during the peak of the earlier energy crisis, it's definitely not insignificant. And a key distinction is that, and I know that Jasmine's alluded to this already, in terms of households' overall financial resilience, the current backdrop looks very different to a few years ago. And whether you're looking at Ofgem or Energy UK data sets, we know that energy debt levels have reached record highs, and we're still seeing an upwards trajectory in debt levels. And that's a trend which is mirrored by Step Change client data too. So the average amount of arrears per Step Change client has deepened substantially in the last 5 years by over £1,000. And this indicates to us that there's a group for which energy bills remain persistently unaffordable. And this is particularly important when noting the context that a return to pre-pandemic energy bill expectations are looking kind of very likely, or is looking very unlikely in the foreseeable future. And given how many people are struggling with enduring cost of living challenges, we unfortunately weren't very surprised at Step Change that polling we commissioned last month found that almost half of British adults are worried about their ability to pay their energy bills over the next 6 months. And that's up from 3 in 10 in January. So there's clearly a growing sense of concern and unease that things are going to get worse from here, financially speaking. Our polling also did find that the majority of British adults, in that case 6 in 10, have personally taken action to try and reduce spending on their energy bills in the last 3 months. And those who attempted to do so reported restrictive actions like cutting back on non-heating electricity, confining activities to one heated room, or going to bed early. And a minority had unfortunately gone without meals to avoid cooking. In terms of who's currently struggling with energy debt at Step Change, so over a third of our clients who are responsible for paying energy bills, which is equivalent to around 45,000 people, were behind last year. And one thing we always emphasise at Step Change is that debt can and does happen to anyone, whether that's due to negative life events such as a job loss, relationship breakdown, bereavement, or living on a lower or inadequate income. But certain groups are disproportionately impacted by it. And that's especially true when looking at who's struggling with energy bills. So our data at Step Change shows that women and single parents, for example, are bearing a lot of the brunt of these affordability challenges. And we also see disabled people, particularly those with higher energy consumption needs, struggling more with costs as well. Another thing that came out of our research that we published last month was that 2 in 5 clients with energy arrears have a negative budget, meaning after going through a full debt advice and budgeting session, their monthly income isn't enough to cover their basic monthly costs. So a really worrying situation there. As I said, our focus was on that upfront affordability angle. And one thing we were keen to do when approaching the research was to assess the impact of current affordability measures and interventions. One of the main ones, of course, being the Warm Home Discount Scheme, and that was introduced in 2011 as a single £120 sum paid over the winter. And it's only increased by over £30 in its lifetime. So it goes without saying, that increases in energy costs have far outstripped that level of support. And one thing that we did pick up on through the research as well is that while those receiving means assessed benefits among our client base were at greater risk of energy arrears, limiting the scheme's eligibility to those in this position alone does still exclude many in need of support. So that leads me on to the intervention we want to see, and that's a transformation of the existing warm home discount scheme, building on some of its positive constructive foundations, such as the fact it's largely mandatory for all suppliers, with over 1,000 customers, and within the kind of current eligibility criteria, possible to deliver automatically, though there's work to be done in that space. So that transformation so that it can properly constitute a social tariff, and we believe that should be guided by a set of principles, including kind of retaining that ambition that it be provided automatically wherever possible to guarantee high uptake. But as others have alluded to, that will require kind of improved data sharing infrastructure, so that we can properly match households that do need that support. Some of the other principles we want to see are kind of support that's tiered to reduce the current potential for steep cliff edges in eligibility, and also kind of more adequately accommodate households with lower incomes and or greater consumption needs. And what I just kind of come to the end of by saying is that the recent surge in wholesale gas prices reinforces the importance of having those responsive and flexible mechanisms in place to support low-income households struggling with energy bills, so we're all kind of collectively able to work faster to make sure people are supported. And kind of very briefly, appreciate I've been talking for a little while now, but yeah, as much as our report was focused on upfront affordability, I do just want to kind of touch on Ofgem's work on the debt strategy and also our work with suppliers as well. So we know firms are on the front line when it comes to stemming the escalation of energy arrears and identifying potential avenues of support. So whether that's debt repayment matching schemes, cheaper tariffs, or effective referrals to free debt advice. And we've been working really closely with both individual suppliers and Ofgem on how to best shape the potential interventions when it comes to kind of improving debt collection standards. And then lastly, we do also remain of the view that the debt relief scheme should be brought forward at speed. So it's really positive to hear David talking about that. And we believe it will tangibly help to ease the weight of certain households' debt. But we recognise it has limitations. For example, the eligible debt period, lots of people accruing substantial amounts of debt beyond it, and it alone won't address the enduring affordability challenges that some households are facing. So the debt relief scheme, we definitely want to see it go ahead, but it does need to be coupled with affordability interventions as I've discussed. So yeah, that was brings me to the end of my points, and I believe I'm handing over to Louise now.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, I'm Louise from E.ON UK. Again, thanks to Energy UK for inviting me on this panel and everybody else. So I've worked in energy for over 15 years and now policy advocacy manager at E.ON. One of the largest suppliers, got over 5.5 million residential customers, also supports me and larger businesses. So for the context of this discussion, we've got to fix the affordability cycle and the problems that we're in at the moment. Bills are 75% higher than pre-crisis in 2020. They may have come down, but there is still a massive problem. Even with the various support schemes we've had, the growth in debt continues. The estimates are just staggering. I think Yasmin mentioned some before, but I've seen estimates that are up to potentially 8 billion by the end of next year. It's terrifying. Why? We know a lot of it. Escalated with the war. The support that is there, it's not flexed with these increases. There's been some broadening, but not real deepening. Premiums are paid by some of the customers, say standard credit customers, as David mentioned. The current support is just to pay the debts. It's a sticky plaster. It's not really putting plans in place to manage the issues going forward or to tackle bad debt. As Jasmine mentioned, long-term debt is growing. The average debt is over £1,600 for customers now, with 1 in 4 in debt. Emily highlighted that it's a decision for others to heat or eat. That is terrifying. Our data does support this view. So it shows 65% of the debt that we hold in live accounts is from non-warm home discount recipients. So the help that is out there isn't necessarily getting to the right people. Of the bad debt that we've got on record as well, change of tenancy drives 80% of that. So there's a massive issue on those that can't pay, but also the bad debt that is on our books that we can fix in the longer term. So there is a large degree of consensus of how we can stem that. So debt relief, targeted support, getting payments from those that can pay. So looking at change of tenancy, pay-as-you-go rules. They are all well and good, but what does this targeting look like and what more can we do? So I think we all agree targeted support will be better. It will mean effective use of taxpayer money, but also customer money. So we've already said 65% of debt that we have on our live accounts is from non-warm home discount recipients. But we delved into that a little bit more. So when we look at our vulnerable customers who have long-term debt, so that's over 1 year, if we apply an affordability filter, only 48% of those people are eligible for warm home discount. There is a real need to have a look at that targeting that we've got. We need to use existing data to improve it. So we've got government, household data, hopefully will come at some point. Supplier data, we've got information on usage, debt, vulnerabilities. The amount of data that we can get from data aggregators to build a big picture of those who need help, those that are in debt now, vulnerability issues, and then all the other information that we can put over the top. We can really make a good targeted mechanism for support going forward. The mechanism for this, we kind of said a bill credit is better. It's one thing that's already kind of built into the system, and it's one thing that customers know. I think we've mentioned as well that a tiered approach around this would be really good. So whether that is by payment method, whether it's by usage, we've already mentioned as well that there's massive vulnerabilities for those that need it for medical reasons. We really do need to be able to take that into account. I think the one thing that we've really looked at as well is the fact that these fixes are temporary fixes. They're year-on-year payments that may or may not be there. We really need to look at a longer-term change. So if we use that targeted data, if we looked at government funding, suppliers funding, other sources, how can we unlock cheaper energy in the long term? So we've been doing that by installing measures, so looking at batteries. We can break that cycle of debt, we can open up the flex market, increase our energy resilience and make some real change. So there's an Ofgem consultation that says that DNOs should roll out low carbon technologies. We're already doing this now, and I think that we can do it better and bigger. So in Coventry, we've installed fully funded batteries, targeting those that are struggling to pay. With a battery and a time of use tariff, they've saved on average £255 a year. We've worked with Northern Power Grid to alleviate some grid constraints, again by putting in a fully funded battery. If we did this on a larger scale across the country, but targeting those that are struggling to pay and looking at areas where there's grid constraints, we could save infrastructure costs longer term and lower people's bills now. So to look at it, debt's going up. Those that can't pay and on some payment methods are getting hit harder, but we're all struggling. We need to use the data to identify those that need help, give them immediate help now with targeting their bills, but also install low carbon technologies such as batteries to help them permanently and also flex the support of the grid. We need to tackle bad debt. It's been talked on here. It's been, talked about Ofgem, charities. I think we're all in agreement. We need to increase the accountability on landlords, look at policies and processes that could help limit that debt in unoccupied properties, and to collect the debt from those that can pay. Again, greater targeting and data sharing would help us with that. If we can do this, we can reduce the debt problem, can stop it increasing, but really ensuring no customers, especially those that need the help, are left behind. But we can also help flex the grid. We can reduce the need for physical upgrades and reduce customer bills going forward. It's a really holistic approach that we've got to look at, not just debt and fixing it today, but also longer term. And I think I'm handing over to Fabian.
Hi, everyone. Louise, you could not have been the better person to go after with all your comments on data sharing, so thank you. I promise everyone that wasn't planned. Hi, everyone. I'm Fabian Chessel from Policy and Practice. So we help energy companies. I can see several people on this call use our tools like the Better Off Calculator councils, Step Change, and others to use data to identify people and connect struggling families with support. I've also got my colleague Ed McNamara on the line. Energy UK, Ed, thank you so much for organising today. It's such an important topic. As we deal with this, we need to remind ourselves these are real people suffering real misery and harm, and that extends to their families. We did work with the Nuffield Foundation to find that even amongst the benefits receiving population, that question of financial precarity really, if you had that financial precarity, children's social care outcomes, were worse off. So I think this is just a topic of such importance. I'm glad to see so many people have joined today. I have to believe with the question, what more can we do? The real appetite to do more. Louise, thoroughly agree with your point that help isn't getting where it's needed. We've got a missing out report which finds that 7 million families on low incomes are missing out on 24 billion pounds of support a year. So this is a problem that's at scale. So today I want to talk briefly, true to our name, on the policy and the practice of the two recommendations that we've really seen from our work in the sector. The first is about using data to proactively auto enroll people and provide, what Louise talks about with that targeted and immediate support. And the second is simplifying applications, deleting forms, creating single front doors. We call this apply once, but it doesn't matter what you call it. It's a very important activity. So on the first, on the proactive support, starting with what we can do from the policy front, the first thing I want to say, it's really good that the winter fuel payment and warm home discount for all of the issues raised today are rewarded proactively using data. That is fantastic. And when we talk to organizations in the water sector, they sort of dream of a warm home discount style system. So that is fantastic. But there's often a myth that schemes must be simple to be automated. And I know that, several people, Energy UK, Emily, and Louise have all talked about tiering their schemes, which is something, we support for many good reasons. And what we found from our work, say, with London boroughs and with Thames Water, is that we were able to automatically deliver quite a complex eligibility criteria of water poverty, which required combining both supplier and government's benefit data. And we proved that could run successfully, swiftly, and support over 25,000 struggling families onto the water help tariff. In energy, you can also see some fantastic examples of targeted funding with the oil heating funding. Partner councils can identify the households that have got both means benefits and are on oil heating. And that level of precision targeting compared to just popping yet another application form on a website is just so much, it's more powerful and, lower cost and faster. So for winter 26-27, we really support the cause for a targeted tiered system rather than broad brush support. The other element is to this question, and I think Louise raised about the wraparound support, not everything is going to be essentially run a big system. And we need to allow energy companies and their innovative suppliers to access the data. The legal gateways are there, the policy intent is there. But I think the real holdup is that departments require that their teams are the ones that process the data, yet perennially struggle to prioritize the resource. I don't think we should pretend that's going to change. We've waited long enough. And, there is an established solution to this called trusted third-party models. And I think we should be much more prepared to lean into that. The other piece of the puzzle is that councils are just hugely important for providing that wraparound support. Please, if you've got any ability to change this, please share the universal credit data with councils, all of it, not just the 40% currently shared. DWP's I Love project needs to start delivery. It's been delayed, at least a second time. Just why are we limiting the rollout of social tariffs to, say only people in London with the Thames Water? So switching now to practice, what can energy companies and suppliers do? We're able to facilitate these partnerships, such as, we've got conversations at SSEN on how council-held data can enroll vulnerable people onto the PSR. So if you've got a problem that data can help, please talk out to Ed on chat with myself or your own supplier. It doesn't have to be us, because what matters is we get support to people. Moving on to the second topic of simplified applications, we've heard about the £5.5 billion debt burden. And it is, again, sort of start with positive impacts. Thank you, Ofgem. We really see that most providers have a tool like our Better Off Calculator or similar, and that is a significant step forward. For those who don't know what that is, if you're in financial distress, you work with bank or step change or your energy company, and they'll take you through what's called an income maximization journey using a tool like the Better Off Calculator, which will tell you in your precise circumstances across all the benefits, central government, local government suppliers, what support you can access. It's a win-win for customers in financial distress. They get much needed support, and the suppliers get an increased ability to pay. That's quite established technology, but there's still a lot of innovation that is making a big difference. To give a few examples, British Gas Energy Trust was finding its debt relief schemes were often underclaimed because most people didn't know it existed, let alone that they were eligible. Now thousands of people do. I sort of wanted to make this point earlier and I forgot, but you've got to remember that people that are struggling with one bill probably struggling with a lot of bills. We talked earlier, I think, I think Jasmine talked about having a holistic view of debt, and got to remember these people don't know all the support that's available. And Southern Water, to give another supplier example, was tired of the old ways where you have another scheme, create another application form. So it created a single application, so integrated the Better Off Calculator. So customers had one journey to access all of Southern Water support, but also all of government support. And what we're seeing is that that process of going for the Better Off Calculator and clicking apply so you can just get the benefit. It's just a much easier process for customers. And for suppliers, again, it's the win-win if it reduces the cost of administering claims and identifying vulnerable customers. So, so if they're with practice front, turning to the policy front, there's a real opportunity that we see for citizens to be able to go right through from gov.uk, where the calculators are, through to an application. It should be one journey, not dozens. I think the other element that goes wrong in those processes is that you need to send photos of your benefit statement. It's just madness like that. The government is building verification systems like Lever. That is fantastic, but please, again, about making it available, getting around to making it available. We need energy companies and the solution providers to have access to those verification systems. So we just don't want to see that bottlenecked. I also think, devolved nations, the Small Consumer Scotland, one of our big points to them was that, we don't want this always to go with priority to national schemes. We need to make sure that these systems are available to devolved nations. So finishing there, so, I've talked a lot for policymakers about targeting and tiered affordability support, expanding access to data and verification systems for councils and energy companies, and try to get that journey from gov.uk to award. For energy companies, there is a lot of ability today to use data to target or order enroll people into not just support schemes, but also, leads to batteries and energy efficiency measures. We've seen Richmond and Wandsworth Council do that, as well as using apply once to make simple application processes. So if anyone's interested in this, by the way, we are hosting a webinar on Wednesday at 10:30 on a multi-sector approach to debt. So, if there's more interest in that, that's another way to find out more. So thank you again, Energy UK.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Fabian. And thank you for those who've put questions in the chat so far. I wanted to pick up on one of the questions, which was around how can suppliers use smart meter data to target support? It's an area that Energy UK's vulnerability commitment has looked at, and is an area that suppliers innovate in and look to use data that's available. There are also cross-sector initiatives like the DCC using their smart meter data and opening it up to charities and third sector to look at ways of identifying support needs. But on that one, perhaps I can turn to Louise to cover off on that question. I think it would be good to sort of maybe open up a little bit to talk a little bit about payment type here, as well as the role of smart.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely a role for the data. one of the things we need to continue to do is get smart meters into homes so that we've actually got that data, and obviously the half-hourly data that we can get out of that. I think the use of data will allow us to look at whether there is vulnerabilities, whether we can actually, whether there's any self-disconnection, any of those sorts of issues. There are teams internally looking at that. It's not one that I'm as close to. So I definitely welcome kind of any views from anybody else on that one.
Is there anyone else who wants to come in on that question?
Ed, I'm happy to try and pick up the second half of that. I think we've obviously seen data be used so heavily linked to prepayment and that self-disconnection, rationing piece, but less so in DD and standard credit customers. I guess part of these strategies and part of this flow through is we've historically seen direct debit as almost the primary type of payment method, and what we've generally seen through that and why it's been that way for such a long time is those customers have higher engagement and more astute and more educated in terms of their energy usage, and therefore following through the likes of when they go through a payment adequacy journey, when they go through all of the different sort of cyclical journeys in that payment method, helps to keep them out of debt. Standard credit is probably the one in the three in which we've got the most issues and the most sort of blindness in terms of data and how do we use that to avoid the debt. So I think for our standard credit population, they're now paying upwards of £100 in the price cap in terms of their contribution to debt costs. Actually, we need to destigmatize prepayment even further. I think we've done a great job through some of the campaigns that Utilita in particular have led and sort of that broader industry widening of that. But actually, how do we move our standard credit population into pay-as-you-go, leveraging, as Louise says, more smart meters we've got on the wall, we've got more opportunity to move into smart PayG. And then we can use that data actually to say, is this person self-rationing? How do we support them? How do we then get that view of affordability from smart meter data, but with such a cohort of customers currently on smart credit that we need to almost move them into one payment method of direct debit or PayG. So I'll pause and Ed, I'll let you come in.
Yeah, so hi, Ed from Policy and Practice, more the practice side to Fabian's policy. So been speaking to a couple of smart meter organisations about ways that they can target that support to more vulnerable households, and two areas of concern came up. One is the uptake of smart meters has been not where it would need to be. I think they're at 73% across the UK, and ideally when you get to the levels of 90%, you have higher insights and views of the households across the UK. But the challenge is getting people to enable that support, and the blockers there are usually socially housed individuals or privately rented individuals. And what we've been spitballing is local authority data can target households that consider within fuel poverty or within a low EPC rating household for not only retrofit, but also targeting to put them into smart metering and sending out messages and comms saying, look, if you get the smart metering, you're probably likely to get cheaper deals, you've got better insight and expenditure, help you with financial education, help you with the sort of how you warm your home. And then once you have those meters inside, you have actually a unique touch point with a lot of low income households. So an area point you can focus on is during the winter period, if you're finding self-disconnectors and people switching off their energy in order to make their bills, you've got a digital touch point with those low income households. So you can use that as a mechanism to be able to reach out and say, there's £24 billion of unclaimed benefits in the UK, or here's a referral organisation that we speak to that you can have a chat with, or try and get them to access support via that route by smarter technology. So that's some of the conversations we're having with smart meter organisations.
Thanks very much. And I think there's Emily.
Yeah, it's just a quick point I wanted to raise, less kind of in relation to smart meters specifically, but more around like when we're having conversations about payment types, is also having conversations about billing accuracy. And I know it's a big focus for Ofgem and of course suppliers too. But one thing that came up in Step Changes Plugging the Gap research was issues around inaccurate billing. For example, advisors describing situations where someone's been able to accrue hundreds or even thousands of pounds of arrears for conversations of with providers about affordability have taken place, but this sometimes having been driven by someone relying for an extended period of time on estimated energy billing, which it then turned out to be an inaccurate reflection of their actual usage, and that leaving them with a shock bill. So what we can do to ensure that's a kind of enduring focus so that we don't prevent that unsustainable build-up where someone perhaps would have been more able to afford it. So just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Thanks, Emily. And I think there's an important point here about the data gap that Jasmine was talking about, that's created by standard credit and change of tenancy. When there's no obligation on a customer to engage with the supplier, it puts them on the back foot, and there's a big data gap there. From our report, we found that suppliers across the board have 1 million customers where they have no details about a customer. It's incredibly hard to start a conversation about targeted support and even accurate billing when you don't have the name of the customer, and details about their circumstance. So if we can tackle the data gap and the balance of obligation to put customers on a better footing at the start, and then, as you say, potentially reduce the use of standard credit over time, so there is more payment routes, more contact with the supplier, then there is more access to support, less premium cost from that payment method. So I think there's a real role in payment type having a key thing here, and it bleeds into what you're saying about accurate billing, I think. We've got another question about why are we not automatically putting people on the best tariff? And given we just had a bit of a discussion about, the need for targeting, I guess it's not always clear who is entitled to the best tariff. But the next part of it is that those households most in need are mostly stuck on the high price cap rather than on cheaper deals available. And I just wondered if anyone has any reflections on some of those trade-offs around the price cap, and ensuring they're on good deals.
Yeah, I'll tackle that a little bit.
Thank you.
I agree. I think it would be great if we could move people onto tariffs that might be better for them, but there is, the free choice on that. I think it's a bit of lack of understanding around tariffs. People think that price cap is automatically the cheapest because that's the government tariff that has been put out there. I think engaging with customers can be difficult, especially if they are having vulnerabilities, if they are having problems. They don't necessarily want to talk to us. I think this is the great thing about, charities, Step Change, everything else, actually going to people and saying, speak to your supplier, because debt is a real problem. If we can get those customers to engage with us, we can have those better conversations. We can say, have you got a smart meter, so that you've got access to the better tariffs. We can look at the tariffs, we can look at debt, we can actually do a lot more for customers. We found issues in the past where we've written to customers and gone, we want to write this debt off for you, please contact us. And they haven't. That response to actually engage with us has been really, really difficult. So I think being able to open those doors, to have those conversations, to say, we can help you, we can get you on better tariffs, is great. We just need to really, really work across, regulators, charities, energy companies, councils, to go speak to your energy companies, speak to somebody so that you can access this wide pool of resource.
Thank you. I see some nodding of heads there, so there's some good agreement there. Does anyone else want to come in on that one? No.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I want to add in on what you said, but the engagement is the hardest challenge with getting people on the right tariffs within the utility sector by far. A supplier we were recently speaking to said they had an energy debt write-off scheme, I think, of £200 off your energy debt. Take-up rate was around 3%. Like, people just don't trust their energy provider. So what Fabian's kind of mentioned earlier is we're kind of pushing for that auto-enrollment campaign and learnings that we've taken from the water sector, and see if we can emulate any of those successes in energy. And to confirm that type of projects we've done, so Fabian kind of mentioned what we did with Thames Water, is where we took their billing data that they provided to us, and they acted as an independent data controller. We acted as a trusted third-party data processor and matched it to another independent data controller, which was the local authority, who have high-level gold dust data information on low-income households, on anything that's entered on a UC or housing benefit or council tax information. You match those two, and then you model in their social tariffs, and then you recommend the right outcomes and which individual should be on what tariff. And we sent a bulk data set back to Thames Water, and across the GLA, they've now auto-enrolled 30,000 households onto the social tariff with an impact of 10 million. That was no applications required, no validation, no proof of information submitted. The individual didn't have to know about the scheme. They just woke up the next day and their water bill was reduced by 50%, which is a win-win for both sides because the Thames Water, they get better engagement. People start responding to letters. They also accrue less debt, which is always a fantastic thing for the water company. But on the supplier side, someone woke up that morning and got a benefit without having to apply and can worry about something else that's that obviously they're probably in multiple debts. They can figure the self and other support. And I think that type of auto enrollment campaign is possible, and it can be emulated within the energy sector. There are some suppliers exploring it. Tariffs is always going to be the difficult one, but in terms of targeted support, definitely that can be worked on. And I think there's a lot to learn across sectors.
Thanks, Ed. And I think there's a challenge there in that the suppliers innovate in this space, and auto enrollment would need to complement suppliers' individual initiatives and knowledge of their customer bases and their individual supplier schemes, which are tailored. And the engagement challenge isn't something that I think can be sidestepped or ignored, given the range of discussion points we've had about the importance of good comms and direct supplier engagement to access the right support. So I think auto enrollment's a really good addition, and I think there's a real good role there. I think there's just that necessary trade-off between dovetailing sort of centralized policy and a competitive market, which we need here. The one question I wanted to ask everyone, given we're coming up towards time, is how do we get policymakers and stakeholders to work together at the pace and detail that's required to tackle this issue, given the warning that Jasmine presented about this winter coming? How do we set the reset button and how do we work together going forward? Maybe if we can go around and see some different reflections from people.
But why don't I start just because it links, I think, your two comments, which is it's not an either or. I think we often have this idea of, well, it's going to be local supplier schemes or central government schemes, and we'd put a third on the table, council schemes. And the truth is, all three need to be pulling the levers that only they can. And if we sort of bring that into a very practical sense, that flexibility that you described, Ed, of the need to understand the individual and this supplier schemes, along with supplying the individuals, is I think sometimes missed by some of the central departments and DWP when it comes to data sharing. And it's why just saying yes, no qualifies for warm home discount isn't enough. So we really would, if we need to move at pace, we need to understand the individuals. We need models where suppliers can interrogate safely and securely the detailed individual level information held by government, like the Thames Water project, maybe hidden through a trusted third-party model, so they can create local customized schemes.
Ed, I'm happy to share my reflections next. I think so. We've been running some engagement across the industry with both regulators and government and suppliers, and I think we all feel very aligned and coordinated in terms of what are the solutions versus where we probably were historically at quite far apart. I think the practical element of this winter is we are very close now to this winter and actually enacting huge policy change. So I think the sort of what's critical and what has the easiest route of delivery for this winter to make an impact is key. I think to Ofgem nearly being there in terms of the DRS scheme and how do we get that over the line for this winter to help with that debt write-off in terms of the historic debt is certainly one way to alleviate some consumer pain. And I think the move forward on home moves is pretty critical. We see sort of two major peaks in the year of home moves, one which comes just pre-winter, and I guess close that gap in terms of customers I don't know, close the gap in terms of standard credit, all falls off the back of us moving towards smart payee on the back of a home move process. So those are sort of the two levers where I think actually industry and regulators are the most aligned and will have an impact in terms of debt stock this winter. Will we necessarily come down? I wouldn't say I can see a line of sight in terms of we don't go through another winter of growth, but we certainly start to stem some of those problems.
Yeah, I think just to come on top of that, we're aligned in what does need to be done on the short term. I think we just need to get moving. I think talking about it is one thing, and we've done a lot of talking. We need to get moving. We need to do pilots. We need to get the data that we need. We just need support, immediate support right now for this winter. But then I think the key thing is let's not think that's it. There is this long-term view. There is what is next. How can we put in a truly targeted support with all of the data streams? But then that's not it either. It is then, right, okay, how can we deal with that bad debt? How can we put batteries in every home in the UK? I told you I'm obsessed with batteries. But how can we get that low carbon technology across businesses, across residential, on every school, on every hospital? What is that long-term plan? It's not a this and it's done, and then that and it's done. Policymakers, energy companies, charities, we've all got to keep working together because it is a systemic issue that we need to come together to fix.
Thank you very much, Emily.
Yeah, I just want to echo what others have said, really, in that one thing that really stands out when it comes to energy affordability is the consensus between the industry and the third sector, for example, as well as policymakers. So how can we work collaboratively and build on political will? We know the Chancellor has spoken in the press lately about pursuing income-based eligibility models for affordability support. The government committed to reviewing the terms of the Warm Home Discount Scheme within the next 5-year period. Obviously, that predated the conflict in the Middle East, so more of an impetus there. And also, I think, emphasising the social costs of not intervening. So others have already touched on this already, but the costs of bad debt and the burden that places on all bill payers, emphasising the consequences of inaction, I think will be something that's important for us all to do.
Thank you. That's great. Moving to time now. I want to thank everyone for joining the session today. There will be a feedback link in the email that you get sent after the session. So please, if you've got time, fill in just a couple of comments about the session, what you liked, what you didn't, and that'll help us going forward. Thanks again to all our excellent panelists and Bringa for supporting today's session. So I'm going to close it there and say thanks everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.